what I think is necessary for Putin to make concessions.
So we're waiting for Putin's answer on this. Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Kit Keller, has said that before any negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow can begin, there must be a ceasefire. Also, French President Emmanuel Macron on X stressed that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky committed to the proposal without setting any conditions. Now, a similarly clear response is expected from Russia. There can be no negotiations while weapons are speaking, and we understand there can be no dialogue if at the same time civilians are being bombed. A ceasefire is needed now so that talks can begin for peace. And what alternative diplomatic or military strategies could the United States pursue? Because Putin rejects call for a ceasefire. For example, in the event of failed dialogue, Berlin is prepared to offer additional arms package to Ukraine. What about the United States of America?
Well, hopefully, the United States of America is also willing to provide more weapons and more support to Ukraine if it's clear that Putin is the one who is withholding the possibility of a ceasefire right now. And I think if you look at the comments by President Trump and J.D. Vance recently, they now seem to be blaming Russia and Putin, which is good because I think that that's accurate, that it's Putin who is the recalcitrant party right now. Personally, I believe that Putin probably is not ready to make compromises, and it's going to take more pressure from the European countries and from the United States, and that pressure needs to come in a couple of different ways. One is more weapons, more training for the Ukrainian armed forces, and secondly, at a minimum, more sanctions, including sanctions that target the companies that enable Russia to sell oil around the world, especially to countries like China and India. So the ratcheting up of sanctions and the increase in weapons will make a difference on the battlefield. And I think things need to tilt even more in the favor of Ukraine on the battlefield for Putin to make the concessions necessary for there to be a ceasefire that would meet the aspirations of the Ukrainian people.
You said about sanctions. How do you see the impact of Western sanctions on Russia's economy over the past 3 years? Do you think these sanctions are having the intended effect on Putin's decision-making or not?
They haven't had a determinative impact on Putin's decision-making, but they have hurt Russia's economy. And by hurting Russia's economy, the sanctions that were put in place starting in February 2022 by the United States and its allies have made it harder for Putin to pay for the weapons and other expenses necessary to field the massive army that he has illegally sent to Ukraine. I hope, though, that there will be even more significant sanctions to hurt Russia's economy further. It's also important to note that with oil prices down, lower than they were previously, that is also simultaneously hurting Russia because they get a lot of their revenues from the sale of oil. So the combination of increased sanctions and keeping oil prices low could really hurt Russia's economy in a way that would cause Putin to wake up and realize he cannot win this war. He doesn't have the resources and the money necessary to continue this war at the level necessary to have a stalemate in Ukraine, which is what we have now.
We hope, Mr. Tafuri, about Turkey. Turkey, as we said, Turkey is ready to assist Ukraine and Russian Federation by hosting negotiations on a ceasefire and peace between the parties, according to the administration of the president. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron. The leaders discussed bilateral relations between Turkey and France relation and global issues, including Russia's war against Ukraine. How do you assess President Erdogan's position as a mediator in the potential negotiations between Ukraine and Russia? Do you think Turkey can play an effective role in peace?
So there's no perfect mediator, right? It's hard to find a country that is completely neutral and that can safely host a talk like this. But Turkey is probably one of the best because while it has been a supporter of Ukraine and even providing weapons to the Ukrainian army, it also has a decent enough relationship with Russia, and there's a decent enough personal relationship between President Erdogan and Putin that they could pull off a negotiation like this. It's also important to remember, though, that Turkey is part of NATO, and it is a NATO ally. And so in that way, it does have good communications with the other NATO allies, including the United States. So let's see if Erdogan, through his good offices, can help make some progress if the two leaders meet in Istanbul.
About China, China has expressed support for the proposed 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, an initiative put forward by Kiev, its European partners, and the United States as part of effort to create space for renewed diplomatic negotiations. Does China's support for the ceasefire indicate a growing alignment with Western diplomatic efforts, or it's pursuing its own strategic interests, or something else?
It's not clear. I think it's a positive that China has said that and that they support the 30-day ceasefire, and China seems to have a slightly different view on this than Putin. It's a little surprising that China came out and said that, given that President Xi was just in Moscow for the victory over Europe celebrations that Putin hosted. I don't particularly trust China as being neutral. We know that China has provided some equipment to Russia. Some of it has even been found on the battlefield here in Ukraine. But when China is saying things like that, we should applaud them, and we should try to get China to be more engaged in this, because China does have a lot of influence over Putin and Russia. It's probably the most influential country for Russia because it is an ally of Russia, and it has significant resources and can give significant support to Russia, which Russia really wants and needs.
Yes, President Donald Trump definitely will not want to be involved in a negotiation process without an end. This was stated by the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, in an interview with RBC Ukraine. At the same time, Yermak emphasized that Ukraine will not give the United States the impression that the negotiation process is endless. Yermak noted, quote, "If they ever get that impression, it will only be due to the fault of the Russian Federation. And if that feeling arises solely because of the Russian aggressor, I believe that America will stand with Ukraine. Can the United States withdraw from peace negotiations on Ukraine?"
These are very good points, which Mr. Yermak has made, and they sound like they are calculated to remind the United States that Ukraine is doing everything it can to support the push that the United States is making for a ceasefire and to end this war. And it also shows a great amount of evolution since the disastrous February meeting between President Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office. And we see now that the Ukrainian leaders, President Zelensky and his chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, are much closer to being on the same page as the United States. And they recognize that maintaining support from the United States is crucial for Ukraine. So I welcome the attitude that is embodied by the statements by Mr. Yermak. And I do think he's right that the United States is not going to stay involved in this forever, that President Trump will turn his attention elsewhere if he finds that there's no possible way to get a ceasefire. But what's important is if the United States gives up on ceasefire talks, that the United States recognizes that it's Russia that's preventing the ceasefire talks from being successful, and therefore the United States continues to provide crucial support for Ukraine.
The sharp shift in the White House's tone towards Ukraine occurred after a brief meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican. According to Yermak, even such a short meeting can change a lot. He explained that the meeting was initially planned to take place after Mass. Had things gone as originally planned, it would have been a different meeting. and perhaps it might not have